Welcome back, everybody. It's one more, holy cow, episode of the Mindful CEO.
Woohoo, woohoo.
What's up, Aaron?
What's up, buddy?
Happy holidays to you.
Indeed.
We are deep. We're going to get deep here today about Ikigai. Ikigai, we mentioned it last time, and we're fulfilling on that promise this time. So
yeah, I don't know how deep. We'll see how deep we wind up getting, because I think Ikigai, that well for Ikigai is deep and long, and I don't,
we'll give it a broad stroke,
We'll
but the
give it a
depth is
broad
going to
stroke.
come from you listening to this. The depth is going to come from your willingness to inquire and take this further.
Ooh.
Don't just listen to this for entertainment. I know we're entertaining, but there's an opportunity in here.
Do you know that?
What?
That we're entertaining? Do you know that?
I know that because I'm entertained every time we talk. And when I listen back
true.
sometimes,
That's true. I am pretty entertained. That's right.
Bust me up.
Yeah. At least we're entertaining ourselves. Right.
That's right.
Who's that? Oh, I was listening to Rick Rubin and
right.
And
we should do a podcast about that sometime, by the way. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. Creative act. Yeah, it's all mumbling. It's everything that we've worked on for a long time. But the thing he talks about is, the audience comes last.
Love that.
In any creative act, the audience comes last. You do it. And this is very much an audience last phenomena for us. I mean, given
for us, yeah,
that we finally got up to 8 of you out there listening. So
that is funny.
We're doing good at chasing people away. But yeah, I'm always amused.
That's so good. I love it. Well, I mean, I think you brought up Ikigai last week. Do you remember what originally?
I don't remember the context in which we brought it up. I mean, for me, I've been, this, I don't know where the mumble or the pathway between that creative act that we just talked about and Ikigai is, but it's in here for sure.
Yeah.
That
cathedrals in here. Do you see on the screen? I'm sharing my screen for those of you watching, but it says Ikigai, and then it says a Japanese concept meaning a reason for being, which to me just comes back to cathedral, right? Cathedral building, like
totally.
Yeah,
and I don't know if we had it in that context, but yeah, so that's and then for those of you listening, I do recommend that you either go Google Ikigai and find the Venn diagram, just because Venn diagrams are the greatest things.
Love Venn diagrams.
Love Venn diagrams. Do you know anyone who doesn't?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I geek out on it more than most. So I think people are
nonplussed by them or non-committal.
I think they're kind to them.
Okay.
I don't know that they're like obsessed with them.
Yeah, I love them. I just think, and the more creative, at any rate, there's a Venn diagram of Ikigai. And the important part about Ikigai is it's, or one of the things that I enjoy about it is that it's so accessible because of this kind of a Venn diagram, this kind of explanation, this kind of visual demonstration of what it means to have the meaning, the reason for being. And it's the intersection of a lot of cool shit. So, I mean,
definitely an expansion on how we've talked about mindful and CEO, that these two worlds of mindfulness and business, CEO business, are sort of expanded, I think, in this conversation of Ikigai, because your reason, maybe let's distinguish the 4 circles in the Venn diagram.
Okay.
There's what we love. So, you doing your reason for being should include what you love. And I think a lot of times, and we could focus on the madness here too, but I think a lot of times we get into business and we haven't brought what we love to our work, to our business. So first circle is what we love. Second circle, if I'm going left to right here, what we're good at. Again, another thing that's like sometimes that gets left behind, right? Our genetic encoding, like we sort of don't bring what we're good at to our work. We do what we think we're supposed to do, or what all the experts and gurus say we're supposed to do, but we don't think about how do I incorporate what I'm good at into my business. Third circle, what can we be paid for? What can we be paid for? And I tend to think of that as like is there a need that's being met? Is there an exchange of $1 for the thing you're offering? What can we be paid for? And then the 4th circle is, what does the world need? So what say
And
you
then,
about that? Yeah.
well, I mean, and this diagram has the overlaps
Yeah.
in those four. So those four are the overall, whenever you may not find a Venn diagram, extra stuff on this one.
Yeah.
But for sure, what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. In the center of that, where those overlap, the Japanese have distinguished that as Ikigai, or that is your reason for being. It's a invented filter, an invented context, an invented paradigm
Yep.
for one to live in, where you are seeking and nurturing and cultivating and growing the center of those four things, where those four things intersect.
Yeah.
Um,
Good.
and yeah, I think it's brilliant in terms of, well, first of all, it's brilliant in terms of the four things it connects.
Yeah.
And then that it gives you a framework to begin to look and see what you're up to the right path. I don't really like right path. But
Yeah.
does it speak to you? Does it call to you? Is it fruitful? Is it worth pursuing?
Yeah.
You can use this as a framework to say, okay, well, do I love it? Does the world
Right.
need it?
Right.
Can I be paid for it?
Yeah.
Am I any good at it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if the answer is yes, or you're going to make the answer yes, because there are things that you may not be good at now that you could get good at. And,
Yeah. Right.
who said that the world needed an iPad, or an iPhone or anything before someone said, I'm going to make the world know they need this.
Right. 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 Right.
Right. So, I mean, there are things you can
Hmm.
develop.
I like the idea too of bringing, if you were to look at I think, so I've known about Ikigai for some years now. And I think how I related to it was intellectually, like, okay, let me journal about and whiteboard what I'm good at, and let me think about and strategize what the world needs and how I can get paid for that. And it's very intellectual. I could read a book about it. Let me go get, what's his face's book about $100 million offers.
Mhm.
Alex Hormozy. And so there was very much an intellectual engaging of how do I do this? I think in light of mindfulness, and as I've been on this path lately of um, moving to my heart, I think it'd be interesting to bring mindfulness to each of these circles. Like rather than whiteboard what do I love, to feel into the spaces of things you love, to feel into your intuition about what the world needs, and listen for that still small voice that sort of prompts you and whispers to you and nudges you, rather than trying to get all strategic about it. Get mindful about it.
Mm. That's interesting, Chris. That there is a time for strategy and there's a time for quiet, right? There's a
Yeah.
time for mindfulness. It's interesting because I just a whole bunch of things just sort of began to connect. So you could say, okay, if I'm going to connect that to everything that I'm about to create in terms of Ikigai, um, you know, this podcast and our work together and what we're building and the way we're bouncing ideas off each other and growing various things and seeing where they head is very much inside it. I don't know if I would say an expression of Ikigai. I don't know how you talk about it. I think, yeah, it's good because I like it. I like specifically a Japanese concept meaning a reason for being, which is really, really, really fucking different than the reason for being. Like this is an expression of an Ikigai. This podcast, what we're doing together, our work, the exploration of mindfulness, the intersection of
Yeah.
mindfulness and productivity, and mindfulness and CEO business, but really business in a very broad sense that,
Yeah.
you're the CEO of your family where you are,
Mm.
is an Ikigai.
Yeah.
It becomes that way. And to then give props to, honor, pay attention to the various aspects of it, right? Like I think you and I are in, we love talking to each other, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're good at talking to each other,
Yeah.
right? We suspect there's some aspects of this that can be monetized. I mean, certainly people get paid to talk to each other. There's a model for podcasts, and there's a model for programs, and model for various things that exist already. So you could be paid for it. And then does the world need it? Well, we do think that there's a conversation needed regarding mindfulness and keeping that present. But does the world recognize it? And those kinds of things are worth weighing all the time.
Yeah.
It's not really where I was initially going with when I broke in. But there's that space of we're constantly looking at those 4 things to look to see, is this, does this make sense to continue?
Yeah.
And which direction should we follow it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
I was, in terms of what direction we should follow it, and you were bringing up quieting and listening to the quiet voice and seeing what the quiet voice has to say about it versus, a corporate boardroom where everyone's throwing out ideas, which is neither is better than any other, frankly. It's not a value judgment. It's just different, especially when one's getting to what you love and your passion. It's worthwhile to quiet. I was forgot how I got here. Hang on. I was on a podcast with Joshua Smith, who's a real estate coach, pretty bold guy. I like him a lot. Straight shooter, very empowering, good, no fluff, no bullshit, and very I really like his orientation, his work. And then he came out and named the podcast that I was on. He titled it, I was just on it, and he titled it Mastering the Inner Game of Real Estate. And out of everything we had talked about, that's what he came up with. And I thought, okay, that's dynamite. That's a perfect way to articulate what I'm committed to in that domain, even in this domain that we're working on. Mindfulness is all the inner game. That's all the inner game. And I thought about it, right? I was like, okay, that's a really good way to promote that. And then I've had the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, in the back of my head for a long time. Have you ever heard The Inner Game of Tennis? No. It's a 70s.
Is it like the Zen of motorcycle maintenance?
No, it's actually a tennis instructor who really did discover for himself the most efficient and best way to coach people was to not coach them on solely their actions, but really on getting their mind out of the game and let their body take over.
Wow.
And it became something of a cult business book. It is something that, it still is something of a cult business book. I'm surprised you haven't heard for it, and I think less of you for never having heard of it. But I thought, okay, well, it's time to read that, right? And I followed that muse, right? The thought, it's time to read that, right? I was like, okay, if I'm gonna really rebrand or continually develop the brand of the Realtor's Edge, of that work that I'm doing with realtors as mastering the inner game of real estate, which is an Ikigai for me. It's like a more focused in. I love it. I'm good at it. The world fucking needs it. And I could be paid for it. There's not even a whole lot of competition in the space. Most of the competition is in the strategy space. Not in the inner game space. And I thought, okay, that's hot. So I started listening to the Inner Game of Tennis. Oh my God.
I was waiting. I was like,
what
was it you were listening to?
Something magic coming. No, it's just my synapses are like, dude, a little too much acid in your teens. Here's payback time. I started listening to the Inner Game of Tennis, and one of the first principle of the inner game, the first principle is to bring non-judgmental awareness to what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I was like, oh, well, fuck, this is, like the universe has me on a path, right? That's the first principle of mindfulness. I mean, it's just, there's no way that I get into all of this in a more perfect domino effect kind of way, like if you have,
When did you read The Inner Game of Tennis? When did you read that?
I'm reading it now. I've never read it.
Oh, you never read it before?
I started it this weekend. And but I've heard of it, and it's been on my list.
Yeah.
To read. And then I was listening to Rick Rubin about the Creative Act and the thing that got me to stop and listen to it was in the Creative Act, he talks about, he doesn't say it like following the muse. He says it like, whatever, but like honoring the little voice. You said something about getting quiet, and this whole thing got triggered over here.
Yeah.
We have, I for a while back, sometime this year, I started practicing honoring my intuition. And what I mean is, if I have a thought, oh, I should go pick that up, like go back and get something I forgot in the house, my natural reaction is, fuck it, I'll get it later. I'll do it later. I don't need to do it. I'll pick it up. And invariably takes me more time, costs me more money, whatever. It's a problem, right? And I had never heard it like that's my intuition speaking, like that's my muse speaking, like that's guidance from the universe speaking. I've heard it like a million, just a thought.
Yeah, just a thought, right?
But I notice as I start honoring it as a muse, as the universe, as a directive from the universe, as my source directing me, right? I become more efficient. I say more time, and it starts speaking to me about bigger things.
Yeah.
I can hear it speaking. It's probably speaking to me the whole time, but I can hear it. It's like a pathway that gets open.
Yeah.
And he was speaking to that. I'm saying it way differently than he says it in the book, but he was speaking to, as an artist, that's what you do. You follow that voice. And somewhere momentarily after that, the voice came up like The Inner Game of Tennis. And I was like, okay, well, as I'm driving to Olympia, download it on Audible and started listening to it just to pick it up. And then, I've been listening to it. And some point early on in the book, he talks about, how much better his players got when they simply brought non-judgmental awareness to their stroke.
Yeah.
Instead of, oh, I'm reaching it too far back, or I'm not following through, or it's too low and I come through, just watching it without judgment. And then letting the body naturally fix itself. And I think that's the nature. And when you brought this, all goes back to you saying, rather than getting in some big strategy session, getting quiet.
Yeah.
And so that was a million thoughts.
Yeah. No, that's good. I can sense it over here too. Like there's things like, oh yeah, connection. There's lots of connections in this. See, I told you and everybody else this would be deep. Like now, if you took this, you listening to this took this, to heart, there's like all kinds of things that get connected. One of the things that's coming up for me is sometimes when I do Venn diagrams, I'll do them as like degrees of overlap. So like, there's how I've done in the past. If you just picture, I'm showing my hands here. There's on one hand, there's who you are. And on the other hand, there's what you do, who I am and what I do. And when those overlap, and you can, picture the 4 circles here, but when they overlap a little bit, there's a little relief because there's some alignment. There's like, who I am and what I'm doing are getting closer together. But imagine those circles really like almost being fully overlapped, representing that who I am and what I'm doing is there's no difference. Who I am and what I'm doing are exactly aligned, that there's that much alignment. And so if you took this visual of Ikigai and you imagine that these circles could go closer together or further apart, would be, I think, a representation of how enjoyable, how pleasurable, how creative your experience of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs
Mhm.
would be for you. And the game becomes, and this is why I think mindfulness and listening to the still small voice and intuition is important here, because the more you can lean into how making these overlap perfectly, which is maybe an impossible game, but how do you get these to be so overlapped that there's no separation between them? They just all feel like flow. It would just be flow, you know, it would just be a sense of
Mhm.
flow.
Yeah, it's exactly. I mean, I think that's uh, the tuning, the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, going back and looking
Yeah.
to see, you know, okay, all four of these elements are present. How do I cultivate them? How do I nurture them? How do I
Yeah.
develop them into being larger parts of what
Yeah.
I'm up to, and giving myself more over to it more fully,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
aligned with the Buddhist saying that, you know, the Buddha said, a true master, there's no separation between their work and their play.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
That's the idea
Mhm.
of this, is that there's just, you are
Yeah. 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 You are.
walking a path. Just humor me for a second. Scroll down. I want to finish. You got on the screen what the explanation of this, that he explains. Let's see, Noriyuki Nakanishi of Osaka University explains that Ikigai was originally conceived as something which gives individuals a sense of a life worth living.
Mm.
It is not necessarily related to economic status. Ikigai is personal. It establishes a unique mental world in which the individual can feel at ease.
Mm. Love that.
Um, yeah, and then this is a fact. What, I don't know what
I'll,
learn life is, but
I'll link this up in the show notes, the
look it
article
up.
we're looking at with the,
Great. So this is just a free blog. This is a public blog. It's not behind a paywall.
yep.
Great.
Yeah, no, yeah, just a free blog I found searching Ikigai.
Okay, great. Oh, good. I'd love to see this.
Yeah.
This is great. This would be really useful, especially, you know, so I
Yeah.
think, Chris, in terms of, you know, the mindful CEO and the brand and our mission and what we're up to, I do think there's, you know, that's the aspect of CEOing,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right, that we're interested in, is that inner game, you know, and I think, let me just ask you, because
Yeah.
given you never heard of the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, if I said the inner game of being a CEO, or the inner game of real estate, mastering the inner game,
Yeah.
what would that bring up for you?
I hear self-mastery, I hear mindset, I hear um uh the personal stuff versus the strategic stuff. I mean,
Okay, it just does, it calls that up, you know, it calls it up for me because I've heard of the book. I just
right,
wasn't sure
right. Yeah.
how much knowing about the book's existence is determining how that gets heard. And apparently in this
Yeah.
focus group of you,
Yeah. Right, right.
it calls it up anyway, right? So,
I think people like us have heard, understand things like this. I think,
other like the inner game, yeah.
yeah, I think,
I think that's true, and I think that's a good, you know, Seth Godin kind of filter,
yeah,
right? Like people like us would know what an inner game is, and that's a
yeah,
calling that's
yeah,
would call them to it, and it makes it easy because people that,
yeah.
you know,
It's good.
uh, I wonder how little self-awareness you would have to not know what it means,
Right, right.
right? That sounds awfully hoity-toity and judgmental for me to say it that way, but I do wonder,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
um,
I also like that there's a piece in here that it is, to your point, like, is our ikigai in this thing we're creating, where uh the thing that we love is the inner game. Like, I love the inner game. it's this mindful CEO is not really about like, how do you, court VC capital, or how do you, um, it's not that side of I don't
Yeah.
love that. I love
Right.
this. And
Right.
we should probably rebrand our show and our whole thing again to like the inner game. Let's
Well,
rebrand it again.
but it could be the mindful CEO mastering the inner game
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
you know,
Fine. Okay, fine. Fine. We'll just make it a tagline. We won't rebrand
right.
the whole.
I don't think you have, oh yeah, well, I'm done rebranding this.
Yeah, no, I actually really like that as a direction, not a destination, but a
Yeah,
direction of like where we're
exactly.
headed. Like where
Yeah,
we're
and
headed is
it gave me a whole new life on, my Realtor's Edge course and the app. I was like, okay, it's
mm,
focus. And that wouldn't have happened had I not, this is a perfect example of the way mumbling turns into the
yeah,
next step.
yeah,
I don't take on promoting the course and I don't do all that. I don't get on Joshua Smith's show. He
right.
doesn't get to rebrand it that way. I don't, all of it is just,
Yeah,
a happy accident
yeah.
of the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
Mm,
Um,
good. Yeah.
yeah. So then one of the next things here is, I'm just putting it out there because one of the things I'm creating is speaking to Mel Robbins. I've talked about this before on the show, but
Right. Yeah.
if
Nice.
any of my 6 listeners know Mel, right, I would love an introduction. I really, not so much for this show. She's got a lot to say about this show, this as well. But I just, in the Realtor's Edge,
Yeah.
the training program, we watched this video of her talking about manifestation,
Mm,
and have been training people in that
mm,
for 3 years, and it's been using that as a tool to train people in manifestation and the power of it and the
wow.
nature of it and how one goes about it and the timeline of it and all the different aspects of it. And every time I watch it, I cry, and it's just so
Mm,
impactful about her story about it. And
mm,
but it really is. It's a story of holding an intention with no timeline
mm,
and being flat-footed that it'll be fulfilled,
mhm,
and taking the next action that presents itself, whether you feel like it or not,
mm.
whether you're scared to or not,
Yeah.
and taking the next action with no attachment
Yeah.
to that action produces the end goal. It's simply taking that action because it's the next action to take.
Mhm, mm.
And then when that action is taken, the next thing opens up.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's a demonstration of, once you ask for it, you don't have to worry about it's being delivered. It's
Yeah.
on its way.
Yeah.
I don't know why the thought this morning came into my head about getting on the boat. You know the story about the flood, the guy that dies in the flood,
Yeah. Where
right?
he's asking for help. God,
Yeah, he's
save me.
asking God for help, and the, someone comes. If those of you haven't heard it, someone comes to the door and says, "Hey, you got to leave. There's a flood coming." And he says, "No, God will save me." And
Yeah.
next thing, the rains come and the town starts flooding, and a boat comes by and says, "Hey, man, get on the boat. We'll take you to safety." And he says, "No, God will save me." And then the floods keep coming, and he's on the roof, and they send a helicopter, and he's like, "Get in the helicopter." And he said, "No, God will save me." And next thing you know, the guy dies in the flood, and he gets to heaven. He talks to God. And he says, "What happened? I thought you were going to save me." And God says, "Are you kidding? I sent you a cop. I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter." And,
Perfect.
getting on the boat
Mm, mm,
is very, very much in line with listening to the muse.
mm,
It's,
mm.
and maybe you don't listen to the cop. Okay. I get it. You want to hang in there and wait for the right thing, but get on the damn boat, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Mm, mm,
and getting on the boat is really taking that next step,
mm, mm.
even if you just can't wait for the end result.
Yeah. Yeah.
The boat is the next step.
Yeah.
They sent you a boat. Um,
Reminds me of that Rumi quote, right? That what you're seeking is seeking you.
yeah,
There's the
great. I hadn't heard that, but that's
Oh
great.
yeah.
We're all full of things each other haven't heard today.
Dude, so many places we could go.
I know.
This would
All
be a
right.
fun, this would be a fun series to do in the Mindful CEO on Ikigai and breaking
Yeah.
it down. Or even a more of a coaching session where there's a series where there's a chance for people to really dig into this for themselves. But
Yeah, to really play with it,
yeah, play with it. Yeah.
and the I especially appreciate this particular illustration of it because it's got four not really pitfalls, but the four places where something would be missing
Yeah.
if you didn't have all of it together.
Yep.
Like if you have good at it, love it, the world needs it, but not pay,
Right.
right? It it leaves you happy and full, but
Mm.
there's no pay, which is fine. You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
do that, right? Or if you're in the world of you love it, you're good at it, you get paid for it, but the world doesn't need it, you're satisfied,
Mm.
but you're not making an impact on a positive impact on the world. So there's all the different pieces, and then to be responsible for the way that if anything's missing, something's missing,
Yeah.
right? That leaves it from being a complete picture
Yeah.
of what is possible in terms of your really loving your life and loving the difference that you're here to make.
It could be the perfect Venn diagram. It could
I
be the
love this
perfect
Venn
one.
diagram.
It could be the
I
perfect one.
I really do appreciate. No, there's the one about throw your hands up in the air, which is DJs and bank robbers and I
Yeah.
think
I saw that this past week. Was that because you did you post that?
I did not, but I love that one.
I saw it recently.
Yeah, but this is a enormously useful
Yeah.
diagram. That thing about no positive impact on the world. This morning, the meditation, the gratitude meditation was appreciating ourselves. And every time I do one of these gratitude every day when I do them,
Yeah.
First, one of the things that always comes to my mind is, okay, what about all the people this isn't applicable for? And I don't know if I'm just shooting holes in the idea of it, or I'm looking for ways to shoot myself down, which I have no doubt that I am, but I don't know, I'm not clear about my attachment to any of that. And but one of the things that showed up in the space of the meditation where I didn't know it was going to go there, was in acknowledging and being grateful and appreciating ourselves, appreciating the difference we make in the world. Appreciating that you, Chris, make a difference in the world. You make a difference for me, you make a difference for Jenny, you make a difference for your kids, and I don't think we take time to really acknowledge and appreciate that we are people that other people are grateful for.
That's good, yeah.
And it got me thinking, that in this space of satisfaction, feeling of no positive difference between me and the world, we're talking about that thing about not how unself-aware would you have to be. I'm curious about the number of people that don't have the experience that they make a difference. They can't get to the experience of they make a difference. I don't walk around in the experience of I make a difference. Sure. But it just takes me being quiet and noticing that where I do. So it's not that I don't. But how common do you think it is that people can't get themselves to the difference they make?
Very common in the day-to-day life of someone.
Not that they, hang on, that they can't get there. I'm clear they're not there. I'm clear they don't walk around there. I don't walk around there. And I've practiced for years, so I don't think it takes me very long to get in the presence of the difference I make. But how common is it that people couldn't, if they slow down to get there, couldn't get in the presence of the difference they make? Do you still think that's really common?
Depends. I mean, my brain goes into all the nuance because I'm like, if we flop down a bell curve here, and I thought, the early and late majority kind of living, I'll just say unconscious, living in a place where, you know, they're living in the story they've been told, they're living in the programming they grew up in, they're living it, like, it can be really, I think it can be really hard for people. I don't, how would I have gotten there without the landmark forum? I don't know, like, uncollapsing these circles. I mean, I'm living in a story called, my dad doesn't love me, and I have all kinds of evidence I've collected for, you know.
No, it's true.
So I think we
I'm
can get it
definitely not
intellectually.
arguing it, right? I'm actually authentically curious, and it's true. I mean, I got whatever 28 years of,
Yeah.
half my life on
Right.
uh inside that kind of self-awareness is, I guess, the bucket that we could throw that into.
Yeah. Right.
So it's, and most of my community, I don't,
Yep.
people like me hang out with people like me. So
Right.
I don't hang out with a lot of people that are just I don't, everyone I know isn't a graduate, but I certainly don't hang out with people that are so
Yeah.
wrapped up in whatever that they couldn't get there. So I'm just curious. And,
Yeah.
it certainly on that, what the world needs, section of the pie in terms of our mission and what we're up to is to bring that
Yeah.
sense. Cause I think that it's then just really a question of people don't slow down enough
Yeah.
to get themselves there, to allow themselves to be there.
Right.
I mean, that's something really for me that I experience being really grateful for, is that I have
Yeah.
done all that work and separated all those things and uncollapsed those things. And
I do think there's a difference between, I mean, to your point, your question, I took the landmark form 20 years ago, 20 years ago. So that I intellectually knew that I had value, that I made a difference. And if I slowed down enough, I could have a moment, a glimpse of it. I could experience it for a moment, but then snap out of it. Oh, I got work to do. And I'm right back into strategy and an outward approach to things, not an inward approach to things, in the last year or two. And really in the last, I think, since you gave me these 7 tenets of mindfulness, and I decided to walk with them on the hills behind my house. Really, in the last 6 months, have I been in a space where my half my time in a day is intentionally, mindfully in the spaces of making a difference and appreciating all that I have, and the other half of my day probably being like trying not to get pulled into, some external conversation. Like, experientially, only in the last 6 months do I feel like I've moved the proportion of my day into a space of experiencing it for
yeah,
lengths of time. That's a different way. My experience of my occurring world is so different, having developed that muscle, developing that awareness
yeah.
compared
Well,
to the
you just said,
previous
I
20
mean,
years.
what you just said, Chris, I think is something that mostly, it's my experience is it's most easily accessible through doing the forum. But that there's an occurring world. Almost nobody outside of the people we know that are graduates have an occurring world.
It's
There's no
just
such thing as an
yeah,
occurring world for
it's just
people.
the world. Yeah.
It's the world. And we don't ever question
Right.
that. You and I haven't pretended that we haven't pretended that the world is whatever the world is in 20 years. We
Right.
haven't lived like that's anything more than just the way that occurs for me.
Right.
Now it shows up, it occurs for me that way. And I saw Rob Henry boosted you and the event. Did you
Yeah.
must have seen that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Rob said this thing once, and I can't remember if Rob said that I said it or Rob just said it. I can't remember how that came up, but in my mind, it lives like he said it. And that was, that we don't control our first thought, but we do have control over what we say after that.
Mm-hmm.
That the world occurs one particular way.
Yeah.
You don't have any control over the way the world occurs.
Yeah.
Initially.
Yeah.
But we have everything to say about how we're going to allow it to occur after we notice it.
Mm.
And,
Mm.
you know, I think that without that recognition that it's going to show up some way,
Yeah.
or it's not going to show up at all, in which case we don't do anything about it.
Right.
Right. Which is where mindfulness also has an enormous value of wonder and contemplation and quieting down so we can notice
Yeah.
more.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the major advantages of a mindful practice, is that you notice things.
Yeah.
And then coming at it with a beginner's mind and wonder, there's nothing but an occurring world. It's like, oh, look, that's how that looks.
Right.
But once you begin to open up
Mm.
and open up, and you notice more and more, you don't, you know, in the day-to-day, things show up and you don't have any control about how they show up.
Right.
They just show up.
Show up. Yeah.
But you have everything to say about everything that happens after it shows up that way.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And
Mm.
I think without that kind of skill,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I
the inner
think,
game, man.
yeah, I think Ikigai becomes some business strategy.
Yeah.
I think it becomes some tool
Yeah.
to work out and figure out how to maximize the utility of, you know, like a very tight container, as opposed to an open, okay, I'm going to notice what's there.
Good. That's freaking awesome, man. God, that's the inner game.
Yeah.
That's that inner game. And I take it for granted because I've been in conversations like this for 20 years. Like, so I take for granted when you ask the question, how many do you think can actually get here? And I actually don't know, because it's kind of been the world I've lived in for,
Right. That's what I'm curious about.
and
Yeah.
I've only been in my own experiment about how much more can I experience it on a minute by minute basis versus intellectually getting it and then setting, 5 minutes aside to try to visit it, and then go back to the other, 23 hours and 55 minutes of my day, you know, doing what. But the more I'm getting present to how good it feels to be in a reason for being,
Mhm.
how good it feels to be in Ikigai. I just want to mindfully live in that energy.
Yeah. And I think it takes all it takes is, you know, awareness and practice.
Yeah, it's good.
It's good. All right, let's put
Love
a
it.
pin there.
Hell yeah, that was freaking love that, man.
That was good.
Perfect Venn
All
diagram.
right. Well, if you want to play with this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You do the
I'll put
outro.
it.
You're always way better at the outro than me.
Oh, I thought you were doing great. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll put this in the show notes so you can look at the image and read the blog post. But but I mean, yeah, this is a skill. It is the more you practice it, the more you talk about it, the more you inquire about it, the more available it becomes to you. And that's what we do in the Mindful CEO community. It is, I would call, Aaron, the Mindful CEO community is sort of this its own Venn diagram of Socratic coaching, right? Where there's an opportunity to get coaching around the inner game, but it's not like Chris and Aaron have your answer. It's Socratic coaching. And then with that is an opportunity to sort of be in a sandbox playing with projects and practices around this, followed by some element of partnership, support, et cetera, for the very important work that you feel like you're here to do in your Ikigai. So, that's what we created, was a community to incubate and nurture that for one another. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to themindfulceo.com, click on the link that talks about the community, and go from there. Peace. See you next time, Aaron.
Bye.